Hi,
Hi.
how you doing? Sorry.
You're okay. Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. It's a solid intro for you.
Yeah, thanks for willing to do this.
That's all right. Um, I quite by chance I saw a post. I saw one of your posts on Reddit saying that you were due to interview Joe, but had to push things.
Oh, yeah. And then I announced our conversation in the same post.
That's absolutely you got to do what you got to do.
So I could just jump around a little bit before getting to metaphor.
Sure.
So first thing I can ask is was acting always what you wanted to pursue?
Um, I mean, there was there was a while where I think I wanted to be a psychologist. Before I really knew what psychology was and what it involved, and I did start to study it at college when I was like 17, 18, and then found out actually it's really, really hard. Um, requires a lot of knowledge, and I think I was attracted more to the kind of the ethical side of it and the sympathetic and empathic side of it of sort of wanting to get involved and help people. But the acting thing was had always been a hobby, and then I really started to take it seriously when I was about 18. And that was, I'm going to say it's an unspecified period of time ago.
Okay. Is that what you ended up going to school for then?
Yeah, I did. I trained. I mean, I did a few different courses at the same time. So in England, it's you do high school till you're about 16, and then you can go to a college between the ages of like 16 to 18, and you can choose usually three or four subjects. So I think I did history, I did theatre, I did English language and literature, and I did media studies, which is kind of a vague subject. There's lots of watching films and talking about what you see and what you hear and what you appreciate. Because my thinking being like, okay, so I'm going to do theatre, but I'm also going to do media, and the two will really like play into each other. And I think they did in the end. Um, we had to make a short film as the sort of the end piece of it, which I know at the time I thought was a real serious like work of art.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I can't find it anymore because that means no one else can find it. And it will never see the light of day. I'm not in it. I made it. And I had my best friend be in it because it was like a short about a vigilante. But you didn't know he was a vigilante until the end.
Mm.
And it was the more I think about it, it's quite cringy. Um, but yeah, I did college until I'd finished those courses, and then took a break and I went off and I worked. I just kind of moved. I left home. I moved out. I moved in with some friends. I was an usher at a theatre for a while. I worked on a concession stand at Hamleys, which is this toy store in London that's 150 years old. And then while I was there, actually, I was working with another actor, and she was training at a school called Central School of Speech and Drama. And that kind of reminded me of what I wanted to do with my life. So I tried the audition circuit for all the sort of main drama schools, and ended up getting a place, which was really, really helpful. And you know, the system that we have here with universities is that anything that's registered with another like examining university board, you can just kind of automatically apply to multiple places at the same time.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, I started training when I was 23, which was a little older than most of the people in the class, but not old enough that I think I could be considered like a senior actor.
Yeah. What was the job that got you into equity then?
Well, the way that it works when I trained was that if you're training in an accredited school, you get a student membership. Most of the drama schools allow you to get a temporary student membership, and then once you graduate, you can upgrade to full membership. So I had it throughout training, which was great because I reserved a stage name for myself, which ended up changing a couple of times over the last 10 years or so, um, for various reasons. I was Mathew McMillan for a while when I was at drama school. That was my grandmother's maiden name. And then I was Matthew Foster for a long time, which was literally a name that my sister just suggested.
Okay.
Because my actual name at the time was taken. And certainly here you can't have two people whose names are too similar. So it was a bit of a pain, but a necessary thing. And then I got married a few years ago and ended up taking my wife's surname legally. So which left me with a what sounds like a much better stage name. And I figured, why have I'm already using a name which isn't my actual name. Why don't I change my stage name to my actual new name and just be one person? Saves on paperwork, tax is much easier, getting paid, there's no problems. I
Mhm.
just need people to spell my name right.
Yeah. Was voice acting something that just happened accidentally, or was it also something that you always
No,
wanted to do?
no, I to be honest with you, voice acting actually was one of the first things I did because when I was at college, I had a friend who was already doing it.
Okay.
And she said, my agent's always looking for people, and actually, she's really short on young men. And I was maybe 18 at the time, so I gave her a call. And the great thing about voice acting is that, and this was certainly at the time, things have changed a little bit. Is that if you call people, they can immediately hear what you sound like.
Yeah.
So it's a really straightforward proposition. Hi, I'm Matthew, and this is what I sound like. Do you need someone who sounds like me? And they can very quickly say yes or no. Um, Unfortunately, she did, and it was an agency called Kids Talk, which specialized in young voices, and that kind of got me into some local radio stuff and some educational content. So there's lots of European students who have been listening to the same tapes that we would listen to learn Spanish or German or French or Italian. Those students are learning English, and some of those voices in those courses are me.
Okay.
Kind of going like, "Hello, I would like 2 tickets for the cinema,"
Yeah.
and things like that. And that kind of, I what I've always really wanted to do and have done to a degree is animation. And at the time that I got into it, gaming wasn't really a consideration. I hadn't been a gamer for a long time. I had a Sega when I was a kid. We had a Mega Drive, and then I played some PC games growing up, but then took a long time off it just because of consoles can be quite expensive, and depending on your lifestyle and what you're doing and where you are, it can become quite time consuming depending on the games that you play. Um, and I think what's interesting is for me, doing games has really ticked a box that doing animation would have done, because I always thought, yeah, I'm going to be the guy who does all these crazy voices and all these sort of quirky characters and does impressions. But actually, the majority of voice acting is people wanting someone who sounds like you.
Right.
The number of briefs that come through, demos that come through looking for authentic accents, natural accents, which I try and do anyway. Like, you can probably tell by now that Fidelio's accent is not mine. Um, Myself and Matt, who voices Basilio, are both. As far as I understand, we're both Londoners. Neither of us is actually from Liverpool,
Mhm.
but the brief was very, very clear that they wanted a Liverpudlian accent, which was quite interesting.
That was actually one comment I saw someone make, as a fellow British player, that they really liked the whole Scouser accents that you guys did for that.
Yeah, I was really surprised to find so many regional accents, because normally when you do UK dubs for things, there's you get my accent, which is RP, which is a kind of it's supposed to be relatively neutral accent, a sort of Southern English neutral accent that's very easily understood. And then they ask for a more working class accent, which is just sort of you're meant to be a bit rough and ready, and it's for soldiers and it's for common characters, but that's about it. There's not much distinction in terms of geography, but one of the interesting things about the English accent is that despite England being a relatively, excuse me, a relatively small place, there's quite a variety of accents to use. It's the same as in the States. There's you go across the country, someone from I know Oregon is going to sound wildly different to someone from Texas. And then someone from one side of Texas is going to sound wildly different to someone from the other side of Texas if you know what you're listening for.
Have you gotten to do American accents for voiceover stuff much? Yep.
Yes, I did some work on Rise of the Ronin,
Okay.
and did various voices on that, including some American soldiers. So there was some variety in there of being. We went for kind of one of them was like quite a kind of Bronxy New York accent, and then one was a kind of a Georgia Southern accent to distinguish them. But then you play around with other factors as well. So you play around with the weight of the character and the size of the character, the age of the character. Have they been drinking? Are they tired? What's their rank if they're a military character? Because that actually informs you quite a lot. So it's good, and you do get the variety to create some strange characters.
Yeah. So when Metaphor and Fidelio came up, was that a pretty general audition for you?
Yeah, I was actually. It's interesting. Preparing for this chat, I looked up the emails, and the first conversation about it was in August of 2022.
Oh, okay.
So it was a while ago.
Right.
And actually, the doing the demos and booking the job came quite quickly. And actually, they send out kind of a pack, and they say, we'd like someone to read for these roles. The understanding being you're not going to get to voice all the roles, but they're going to sort of go through them all, see which one they think you're most suitable for. And also, it's a question of balance. Like if they've got two guys and they need people to play off each other, they might like you for two or three different roles, but actually, like, again, this is me assuming things, but when they're trying to create the pairing of Basilio and Fidelio, they're going, okay, so who sounds like they work together? So I tried out for Basilio as well. I tried out for Luis and a couple of other characters. But the weird thing about this for me, about all this for me, is that I sort of didn't know much about the profile of the game. And actually recording it, being at the studio, we were chatting one day and I said, do you know, it had a project title,
Yeah.
just a kind of a vague working title. Like, when they make movies and they have a kind of a fake name for the movie. So nobody knows that it's the movie, but then very quickly everyone learns what it really is. And I asked one of the engineers what the game was actually called, and he didn't know. He said they're being really vague. They won't tell us. It's all kind of high security because you sign an NDA,
Yeah.
which basically says you won't spread any information about it, and if you do, it will really come back to bite you. You do relate to the bond a lot between the characters, and like fiercely defensive of each other. Um, I think it's an interesting thing that they really do come as a pair, and I like the choice of having Fidelio be the older brother, but also the smaller brother.
Yeah.
Because it turns things on its head a bit. It's natural for you to assume that the taller one's going to be the older one. But he's really eager for Fidelio to kind of be a better person. For Basilio to be a better person, to kind of live up to an ideal and kind of do the right thing. And I always kind of like the idea that Fidelio was someone who was trying to do the right thing, but for whatever reason always found it hard. The world of the game is such that it's not easy for people to do the right thing.
Right.
Everyone's kind of out for themselves to a degree. And so to be a sort of selfless character, to be a hero character is not a straightforward choice.
Was there there's more than one, but was there a default line that you had to get into his headspace?
Good question, actually. Um, no, it's kind of a it was kind of a demeanor thing rather than a specific line. I know that sometimes for some actors when they're working on a different accent, particularly if it's a very, very different accent to their own, they need a line that involves a lot of different sounds that they wouldn't normally use. But because Fidelio is British, albeit from a different place, it's not so wildly different that it took a long time to kind of click into. So we talked a bit about how Fidelio was always watching, was very mindful of what everyone was doing, and he liked to project this air of command and of control and of just being a really cool cucumber and very unflappable, which is helpful because I'm not a cool person. So it's quite nice, and it does inform your physicality. It's not the kind of role where I'm like covered in motion tracking dots because because of the nature of the animation of the game. It's the way that we were working was a lot of it had some of it had already been done, some of it was just animatics, but like they're not mapping your physicality, they're not kind of mapping your face, but just finding that stillness for me is really helpful. You've probably noticed I move around a lot when I talk and I gesture a lot when I talk, but you have to be quite controlled for those brothers. They're quite passionate. Basilio obviously goes further on than Fidelio for a number of reasons. And they're very passionate characters, but they're not, that's quite a sort of focused passion, which is a really useful set of instructions to kind of to voice with, to work with.
Did you find yourself going to a, I don't know, like an emotional dark place when recording his death scene or his spirit scene with Basilio?
Yeah, yes and no. Yes and no. It's funny actually how, because we have to do all the fight noises as well,
Yeah.
which is remarkably tiring. You don't think it's going to be that bad, but I know people who've lost their voices for days just doing fight recordings. Usually when they're voicing the main character, and it's got to be hundreds of different kinds of things. Fidel, you do the sort of the blocking noises, and then the light attack, and then the heavy attack, and then the slight wound, the heavy wound, and it goes on and on. But for dialogue like that is really nice because normally for someone like me who, on the whole, a lot of the games I've done, I've voiced background characters and various characters, supporting characters. So you don't really have an arc. You don't really have somewhere to go with the character. It's all pretty standard stuff. Getting to have some proper moments was really nice. The challenging thing about it is recording it individually. My experience was that I was just in the studio with the director, with the engineer, and sometimes the director will read in and give you the kind of a sense of, if the line has already been recorded, then very often you'll get that played in for you. But otherwise, it's the director reading in and giving you a sense of the emotional tone of things. So you have to, it does stretch your imagination a bit, because it's inherently a very strange environment to being in a soundproof room with a piece of glass next to you, and usually 2 or 3 or 4 people just watching and going, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, it's good fun though. It was a really interesting project to be involved in, because certainly down the line I realized, oh, there's people who really care about this. They're really invested in it. Which I'm glad I didn't know about at the time, because pressure can really affect the choices that you make.
If you've gone back to look over any scenes, like, is there a single favorite one you have for Fidelio?
That's a good question. I mean, I like the introduction scene actually,
Yeah.
because it feels very much like he's so patronizing at first. He comes across as a really patronizing character. at the start, and you don't. It's interesting though that you start to learn about his values, and that he does this job because he has to, not because he wants to, and it kind of really chafes on him. And then when his dying, I apologize, I don't remember the exact words, but you know, his dying wish is for his brother to basically do better,
Yep.
to look after people, look out for people because it's the right thing to do. And I think that for me, the read that I always had of it was that there was a real regret on his part that he hadn't lived a better life.
Yeah.
And if he'd had, you know, if I'd only had more time, he would have tried to do better and tried to be the person that he wanted his brother to be.
Yeah, maybe I don't know, maybe you've seen this too, but and I can say personally that um the fandom, uh one reason why they like the brothers so much is because of your performance.
No, it's been nice. It's been I don't I mean I try not I don't do a lot of high profile work generally. And so I don't really Google stuff that I've done. And I've also done a lot of theatre in various roles. So you learn not to look up reviews because it can really color things the wrong way. Um, but in looking up, like trying to get some footage from the game to put onto show reels and things like that, you end up on Reddit because everyone ends up on Reddit.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing actually. I again, if I'd known that there was this love for the characters, initially I would have been intimidated for sure. I think it's been really nice to see people. Um, what's nice is the people are like, oh, I really wish Fidelio had been a playable character. And I go, yeah,
Yeah.
me too. That would have been like an extra week of work for me. It would have been great. Um, it's lovely. It's nice. And I have to say, confession, I've never met Matt.
Okay.
We didn't work together
Yeah.
directly. So I keep meaning to look him up and try and get in touch with him because he's also done a lot of games.
Mhm.
So it's interesting as you go along. I bought a PS5 a couple of years ago so that I could, you know, try and play more and get more involved in the world of things and sort of get more of a grip on how games are evolving and how the production is changing. But I also have two young children, so it's like, when do I do that? That
Yeah.
doesn't take away my time from them.
Mhm.
Um, so, but sorry, to go back to your question, yeah, it's nice. It's nice to see people responding really well to the game. And I don't know if you've seen, but today they've just announced the Game of the Year awards,
Yeah.
and it's one of this, I think, six nominees.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
the Game of the Year, which is amazing. Um, I think it's up in like four or five other categories with some pretty heavy hitters,
Yeah.
um, which is really, really, really nice to see. You don't know when you go into these things necessarily how it's going to turn out, how it's going to be received, and what kind of a life it's going to have. Some games people talk about for 3 days. They talk intensely about for 3 days when it comes out, and then it just kind of disappears.
Hmm.
Um, and other games just live and live and live, and this seems to be
One of those. Yeah.
one of those.
I know one major thing I didn't ask yet. What do you think about his design when you saw Fidelio for the first time?
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating. JRPGs have a really distinctive look, and I think it's what's really interesting about games is right now there is such a drive to go, okay, so how realistic can we make this? Like how real can we make this game look? But JRPGs go, no, 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 let's go the other way and go,
Yeah.
how fantastical can we make this? So we're going to give you purple hair and we're going to give you cat ears, and no one's going to mention it. And everyone's going to look completely different to each other, different heights, weights, builds, colors, backgrounds, accents, statuses. And it's just the world of the game. But they do it in such a cool way that I think a lesser studio, it would all look a bit confusing.
Yeah.
But Atlus do a really good job of finding all these different aspects and elements and tying it all together so that you totally buy the world of the game that they create. And I did see the design of the character actually quite early on,
Okay.
which is fun to do because again, you do background characters, you just go, okay, it's going to be generic man. Um, so yeah, it's fun to play someone who's got quite a sort of distinctive look and feel to him.
I know we touched about on this a little bit already, but is there something that you would have hoped to have seen for his character?
Oh, I mean, a twist like half an hour later to go, he's not dead.
Yeah.
He's not dead. He's here, really. He's okay. He's going to be fine. Um, no, I mean, I think he's not in it for as long as some of the other characters, but I think he gets to do a lot. I think, my memory, again, we recorded a lot of this 2 years ago. So just my precise memories are more of an emotional memory than a sort of specific memory of words that we
Yeah.
recorded. He was a really fun character to voice. He's quite intense as a person, and he really wants to like make his impression felt. So maybe like a big boss battle where you get to play as Fidelio for like 5 minutes would have been cool.
Mhm.
But that's fine. It's the nature of the beast. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll do a tie-in game that goes back, and you get to follow Fidelio and Basilio as they sort of, they roam around before they meet the rest of the team, before they get tied in with everyone else.
Mhm. It does seem to have, even more so than a lot of the other supporting cast, that when you look at the YouTube comments or posts online about Basilio's awakening scene and
Mm.
your performance and Matt's performance, that's so like everybody's just saying like this is where I started crying, like I can't stop crying, and yeah, it's just amazing.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, as I say, I've tried not to kind of go too far into it because it's a bit weird to Google yourself. But no, the comments I have seen have all been overwhelmingly really positive and really lovely and complimentary, which is nice to see because I think there is a side of gaming now that can be gaming has a really negative um, impression in the I'm going to say the outside world,
Yeah.
like the sort of the general news and the media. Gamers don't have a good look. Gaming is known as a fairly toxic place to be. Um, so discovering that there actually is a really strong sense of community in amongst the people that play metaphors has been really interesting. And I don't, from my limited exposure to the Reddit threads and to some of the YouTube comments and stuff, nobody like fights about stuff. Nobody
No.
people disagree about certain characters, but it's not disrespectful and it's not aggressive and it's not no one's having a fight. It's just like, oh, that's a really interesting point. I never felt that personally. For me, this is what I felt, which is great because I think, as I say, I've got two young kids, and I think that they're going to be far more online a lot earlier than I was, and I'd like to think that if they wanted to get involved in games, not necessarily as actors but as players, um, that it would be a welcoming place. I've got one boy and one girl,
Okay.
and immediately I know from various friends' experiences, like their experience of gaming, depending on being a boy or a girl, has been very different.
Yeah.
And so I hope that things are generally moving in a positive direction. But maybe that's more to do with the kind of the tone of the game. It's an adventure game. It's not about necessarily the fighting format of things. Like
Yeah.
that's just an aspect of the way that the story is told. It's a means to an end. No one's going out to buy Metaphor because they really love fighting. Maybe some people, I don't know, but it seems like the majority of people just want a really good story.
Yeah. Is there something that you'd want to say to the fandom then?
Just a big thank you, a huge thank you, um, especially to one person that I saw who said, "Would I think the best thing that they did was casting actors in their native accents, because it really lends an air of authenticity to things. And I was like, yeah, I think I did okay. I think I did okay with the voice. If someone's saying that, then it can't have been too distracting.
No.
But as I say, people have just been really, really positive and really supportive and really enthusiastic and energetic about the game. And obviously, getting the Game of the Year nomination is incredible. Um, and that says a lot about the way that the game has kind of made its presence felt in the gaming community. And I also appreciate that it is a wildly different game to a lot of the other, the other games on that list, because there's a lot out there for people to play. And I think it's a bit like with movies now. You have to appreciate, as someone who's making a movie, if someone goes out and makes the time and buys a ticket and sits down in a cinema and watches your film, like, that's a commitment. And similarly, if someone goes out and buys a game, that's, as I say, potentially hundreds of hours of their life that they're spending on this game, not, Rise of the Ronin, or,
Yeah.
or any one of the other hundreds of games that comes out in a year. And also feels like the kind of game that people they're completing and then going back again and going, okay, well, what can I do differently? How can I experience this game? How can I try and experience this game freshly again in slightly different ways?
Is there? I don't know if you
Sorry?
I don't know if you could come up with anything, but how do you think Fidelio would respond to like a fandom for him, like a fan base for him?
uh, I don't think he'd be surprised. I think he'd be quite flattered, and I think he'd want to know that he's got more of a fan base than Basilio.
Yeah.
That would be his main thing.
Mhm. Well, my final question is always asking, what do you want your legacy to be?
Um, hmm. I always used to think, when I was training and sort of going into acting early on, I always tried to think that I had to tell myself to don't be clever, just be honest. Because I always had a tendency to overthink the work that I was doing, and I'd go, okay, well, if I do this thing at this time, that's going to work really well. But the more I studied and the more I trained and the more I worked, the more I realized, if you can find honest moments and if you can find a really truthful approach to a character, then it just works. You don't have to be clever, and you don't feel like you're really trying to make it work. I'd like to think that, if I quit tomorrow, someone could look at the work that I've done and go and find some truthful moments and find some honest moments and go, no, I believe that. I believe that. If someone's playing the game and they get to the bit where Fidelio has his last words and they really feel it, then I've done my job.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that we got to do this.
No problem. I'm glad we can make it work.
Hope you have a good rest of your night then.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to go and see if my baby's gone to sleep. So
Bye.
thanks, Chris. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Okay. See you again.